All right, folks, I am just delighted to be here with all of you and my amazing league, Tammy, Reynard. This is our 5th year offering the Middle Years series. And if you would, all of the past um, episodes, webinars are recorded, and you can find them either on the, I'm just moving my cursor, everybody. The Edith Landau Virtual Learning Center website. You can find them there where you registered for this. You can also find them on the Rural Education Advisory website, ruralteachers.com. And for year 1, you can also find the videos on School District 61's website. We are grateful for our partnership with the Rural Education Advisory, really committed to creating access for professional learning and to connect and networking across the province. We want to know that we want you to know that you're welcome here, and we're just so excited that you're here. And also in the work that we do, we welcome you to be open to the learning that happens and recognizing that some things will stretch us a little, some things will open us up a little bit, and hopefully today you'll also see yourself a little bit too. So it's a little bit less like, here it is, go do it. And it's more like, let's think about our practice. Here's some possibilities, and how might we respond to and engage our learners in meaningful and deep ways. Finally, we'd like to acknowledge the financial support of the Ministry of Education and Childcare, who are supporting us also in partnering for this series. I'll pass to Tammy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just want to say welcome. We're grateful that you're here. A special thanks to the folks who are sharing their learning journeys with us today. I'm Zooming from the traditional territory of the Cowichan or Cowichan people, Hulkaminam speaking people, and just really grateful to be here and be with you. And we know that folks pick up the work. Sometimes things land in our lap just when we need them. So my hope for you today is that that just right thing that you need is offered today, and you're able to pick it up and contextualize it in the work that you're doing. Wishing you a great afternoon.
Thanks, Tammy. I'm joining you from Seal territory today, and I've had the great fortune to learn from knowledge holders, elders, knowledge keepers over these last 12 years. And one of the ideas that's been gifted to me by Jeanette Armstrong is the term Analchenwich. And Analchenwich means that many voices coming together to solve problems and think together in ways that we couldn't understand or figure out by ourselves. And so thanks for coming today, but also thanks for connecting with people wherever you are to create, to figure out, to support. And through our diversity, we can figure things out better than we ever could by ourselves, or just hanging out with the exact same people who think the exact same things as we do. Just to briefly frame the work that we've been doing, we've been focusing on multi-age classrooms this year in the middle years and connecting it to middle years philosophy and practice. And today you're going to see how deeply connected we are to this idea of nurturing and supporting middle years learners in their identity development, how critical a time this is, but also valuing diversity as a central principle. And that connects to challenging curriculum and learning in multiple ways, personal and active learning. But at its heart, at its core, is the fact that we value the learners that we're working with and understand that they're going through this incredible developmental time that doesn't happen at any other time. And what an opportunity and a privilege and a challenge we have working with middle years learners. I'm going to pass the torch first to my long-term colleague, Dr. Shelley Moore.
Is it me? Whew. Hello, let me start my timer. I'm learning how to keep track of myself. Okay. So, I'm Shelley. Finally, Dr. Shelley, finally. So excited about that. On the screen is just my contact info, and I know that these slides will be posted in the areas where this is hosted. I'll also post them on my website as well, because I know that people are familiar with that. I am also joining, want to acknowledge where I'm joining from today. I'm honored to be a part, joining today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of Squamish First Nation, specifically Neklalaquam, also known today as Bowen Island. Beautiful, beautiful place that from as an Alberta girl, will always see this land as a novelty, and just thankful every day that I can see the ocean and the mountains at the same time. It's just a thing of beauty. If you would like to take a minute and acknowledge the place where you're joining from today, please feel free to do so in the chat box today. It's a very important thing that we can do as settlers and stewards of this land. I was thinking about what I wanted to share today, and I know there's so many things that I would love to share, knowing that I have my timer didn't even work. Leyton, can you put in the chat box what time I'm finished? Thinking about how much time I have, and some questions that I know are lingering in the world around inclusive education, and knowing that I just finished this dissertation process, which specifically looked at how to make grade level curriculum accessible for all students, including students with intellectual disabilities, and just trying to make this more possible, not just for students, but also for teachers. I know that, people are tired and their workloads are very high. I can appreciate all of these things, but also understanding that this isn't something that has to be more work, but like a different way of thinking about the work that we do, and that it doesn't have to be more work. And so thinking about curriculum and making curriculum accessible. If you were with us last year, I walked through a process of an example looking at backwards design as a really effective strategy for helping to kind of make curriculum more accessible. So I'm going to use that today, but I'm even going to go bigger. I'm even going to go bigger than that, because it's not just backwards design that we're talking about. And so these are kind of 4 things I want you to pay attention today, that are all ways that we can open up curriculum for anyone. The first one is the beauty of questions and inquiry. We have some pretty fantastic big ideas in our curriculum, and a great strategy is working with students to draw questions from those big ideas, and making sure that one of those questions are big enough for anyone, right? And when I say big, it doesn't mean it's simple. It means that it's big. It means that it's relevant and big enough that anyone is able to respond to. And that's the beauty of having those questions and big ideas, is they're not grade based, right? Those are life based. And as long as you are alive, you can connect to those big ideas. And so just making sure that when we're doing our planning, that the language that we choose and the concepts that we're pulling in are big enough for every kid in your class to be able to answer. Knowing our learning standards is key to inclusion. It's directly connected to increasing engagement in universal design for learning. We need to know what our standards are. Our students need to know what our standards are. It really anchors the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? A really great practice that I'm a fan of is, and working with students to do this as well, is to turn those learning standards that aren't written for students into language that is friendly for students, and so that they are not just looking at words, but that they really understand the why. Why are we doing this? And the thing about BC is that if you really look at the learning standards, you realize how open they are to anyone. They're very much written in a way that are conceptual and grade-based. Some may say vague, I say inclusive, where they're big enough that anyone could meet that standard if we're creative and innovative. A simple example of that is looking at the word text instead of the word writing, or the word book, or really opening up the different ways that students can communicate through text. And it doesn't mean we're abandoning writing, but what it does mean is that we're opening up avenues, so that even if we have a firm goal, that there are flexible means to get there, and that is opening up curriculum. Access points are my favorite. Access points is really shifting away from that retrofit idea of, I'm going to do this for you and this for you and this for you, which is an impossible workload task, to this idea of how can we start today, this activity, this unit, how do we start in a place where everyone can start together? We don't have to end in the same place, but Where can we start so that everyone can start together, and then we're off. Connected to that is also a shared activity where we're building on the success of students. And so starting in a place every day where students are going to be successful, and how we can do that is to design activities that we know students will be successful. We know what their strengths are. They're connected to their interests and their strengths, and then we can add on to that, and they'll have a better, easier time moving on to more complex tasks and ideas if they're starting from success rather than starting from failure. And I know that you know that. What I wanted to share with you today, though, is this example of an educator that I worked with in a school, in a secondary school, in the middle years age group, that just it was just amazing. Like, she was so intuitive, and I remember like working with her and being like, you don't even realize how inclusive you're being. Like, you know, you just meet someone and they just are like, but this is just what you do. And I'm like, I know, but if it's intuitive, it can't be systematized, right? And so part of us working together was helping her to see why she was so inclusive. And she did this one lesson that just blew my mind. And I don't even think she realized how revolutionary it was. And so this is like a huge shout out to this colleague of mine that just, I think, is showing what's possible in this world, and showing that it didn't have to be more work. It just was a different way of thinking about the work. Before I show you that, though, I want to kind of just review that backwards design framework that I was talking about. One way to look at the BC curriculum, to really move away from that kind of linear sequential perspective of curriculum that many of us were conditioned to view curriculum through, was this idea of a flip book, because one way that we can be really inclusive with curriculum is to look at curriculum in a way that's responsive. And so I saw a flip book once, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, this is such a good way to think about curriculum, because like, if I'm a grade 8 math teacher, you know, I pick up my flip book, and it's going to be the same for every grade 8 math teacher that picks it up. But what makes it inclusive and responsive, and we can do this in BC, is that the pages that we flip can reflect who our students are. And so like, I might pick up the book and it's a miserable two-toed lizard, but another person might pick up the same flip book and it's a happy two-toed panda bear. And so it's standards based. The book is the same, but how it's read depends on the reader. And so when I think about the BC curriculum, that's how I think about it, is that the curriculum is the same for everybody, but how it's read can reflect the communities who are working through it. And so thinking about the pages, when I think about like a unit plan, the pages in the book of our flip book, there's 4 big pages to our book, and this represents the framework of the BC curriculum, right? So if you think about the head of our animal, right, the mole, the head guides us, right? The head guides us. This is where we look at our big ideas. This is really what situates the context. We're not evaluating big ideas, which is why we have the flexibility to pull in student inquiry. We have the flexibility to connect this to place and interests and experience and strengths, and getting students in here. There's big ideas in the curriculum. You can use those, you can use your own, you can pull in questions, but this is really what creates that connection between lessons and the why we're doing any of this work. And we know the power of inquiry through that. And so that's really like, so it's guiding us, right? Our core, the body of our book, is our learning standards. And we have 2 kinds of learning standards in our curriculum. We have content goals and we have curricular competency goals. And content is still a scope and sequence, but you'll notice the size difference here, right? Our content has become bigger and more like synthesized so that it makes room for competencies. And I'm like, I'm not a quantitative person, so I'm not going to be like, for every 1 content goal, you need 3 competency goals. Like, that's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is that there is a clear shift in our curriculum to move away from an emphasis on content towards an emphasis on curricular competency. And so it doesn't mean we're abandoning content, but it is like kind of a worthwhile practice to think, what am I using this content for? Like what competencies am I building through this content, as opposed to what we used to do, which was what content are we learning, and what skills are we pulling in along the way? Like, so there is an emphasis. So one way to maintain that emphasis is when we're choosing our learning standards that we're going to target for our unit, is to make sure we have more competencies than content, right? To keep the emphasis on curricular competencies. And so I'll show an example of that. So that's our core. That's what we evaluate, right? The other thing, though, is that curricular competencies aren't a scope and sequence. Those can be responsive. And so you can choose those based on the needs of your class. And there's some great work around, using like performance assessments to determine which curricular competencies students need. And so, like I say, like you can be teaching the same subject area, but, as a humanities 8 teacher, but the competencies that you choose can reflect your kids. Like, it's responsive to your students, and it's just, the flexibility is beautiful. Our feet, our foundation, what we stand on, these are our core competencies. We're not evaluating these either. We can absolutely assess in a collaborative way with our students ways that we want to target them. But this is, again, responsive to the class. Like, bring the kids in as a part of determining what those core competencies are. And so when I'm doing my curriculum design with my teams, we'll kind of go through each of these pages and say, okay, let's identify what the goals are that we are targeting for this particular unit. And so this team that I worked with, we did that. And we kind of, this is a planning template that I can make available to anyone. But basically, we looked at the big ideas from the curriculum and used that to create a guiding question that was big enough for everyone in the class. Now, in this particular class, there is a student who has autism. He communicates through pictures. He has an iPad. Usually we'll list all the things that a child can't do, but instead we made an effort to really talk about the things that he could do. He loved his peers. He had an exceptional skill and strength in his senses. So he was like, he would always be touching textures and feeling different, objects and textures around him. He was visually so strong. He communicated through pictures and symbols, and just was always drawn to photographs and videos. So like there were so many things he could do. And so that's what we used to help make this unit accessible to him. So when we created this guiding question, we wanted to make sure that it was big enough for him too. And so when we were looking at this, we had an idea that we wanted to develop some writing with the students, specifically around like memories and personal experiences and creative writing. And so we used the curriculum to kind of help guide us. And so our big question was, how can we use the power of language and story to capture and share a personal experience? And we pulled out our content goal, which was language, features, structures, and conventions. We have 3 curricular competency goals that we're explicitly, intentionally targeting for this unit. And then from those, we created and translated those into some student-friendly statements that would make sense to the students, specifically targeting what we wanted to focus on for this particular unit. This is a process that doesn't take a long time, but it's really effective in really being just zooming in specifically on what we want to target. Okay. So the part that I want to show you, though, is there was one particular lesson that I was able to observe, and this is the lesson where she blew me away. And to align with our big kind of like, now you have the backwards design curricular planning piece. Now I'm going to go to these 4 questions, and I'm going to tell you what the 4 questions were, the 4 elements were for this particular lesson. Okay, so here's our guiding question. How do we use the power of language? The specific learning standard, and this is the student-friendly version that we were targeting on this particular day, was I can make a plan to develop and create a text. Okay, yeah. The access point designed for our student with autism was I can evoke a memory or experience. And the reason why it was that was because, what we wanted all the students to be able to do was to kind of draw on a memory and then make a plan to really use language to share that experience through writing. And so we're like, okay, well, what's an access point to a memory? Well, it's like evoking it. Like you got to pull it out. And so what this teacher did, and it's so good, she designed an activity, because we had been talking about the difference between a shared accessible activity and a modified activity. And, you know, a shared accessible activity is something that's designed for the person who needs it, but is available to and helpful to anyone. Okay, so this is what she did. Are you ready? It's brilliant. She created an activity called Memory Lane. And what she did, because at the time, these kids are 14, and she Googled what was popular when they were like between the ages of like 6 and 10. Okay, because she Googled them. And then she created this path through her classroom that were items or objects or pictures that reflected the events and activities and toys and sounds from the time when they were kids. Okay, and so I took some pictures just to show, but it goes around the whole room. And so before they even started planning, they all took a trip, a stroll down memory lane. And so these are all pictures of toys that were popular, and it was around like 2005 was the year she was Googling. She had an iPod with songs that they could listen to. She brought in toys from that time period that they could touch, that they could look at. She brought in a familiar candy, like from Halloween, like we all ate rockets, right? This one I love. She brought in spices that they could smell and taste. And so I looked at them like, are you serious? This is so good. She's like, well, that's what she said. She's like, well, I just thought like what can, we're gonna give him a fake, what can David do? And right, Rose, what can David do? She's like, he's so good at sensory experiences. He loves looking at things and touching things. He can sense. And I'm like, yeah, he sure can. And because he could do all of these things, what ended up, and like, we didn't say to the class, okay, class, we made a memory lane so that David could be included. Like, no, that's what we did. We said, everyone, we are going to evoke memories today. And to help us to do this, we are going to use our senses and interact in this whole like experience. And then once we're finished, we're going to be like, okay, what was evoked? What did we draw from ourselves that we could dig into more? And here's the part that blew me away. So here is a picture of David, okay, in the blue shirt. And because this activity was something he could do, like it was all built on what his strengths were, he didn't need us, right? And because it was something that the whole class did, he could do it with his peers. This was not adapted or modified. This is something that everybody did together. And because everybody did it together, this was not a power imbalance. And this is often an issue that comes up, especially as kids get older, is that the relationships between peers become one of a helping relationship where I'll help you to do that. But because this was derived from grade level, because it was an activity that everybody did that would help everybody to participate, this wasn't a peer helping David. This was a peer experiencing an activity with David. And that, my friend, Rose, exactly. It was accessible for everyone. It was helpful to everyone. And it was an opportunity for David and one of his classmates to learn something together in an equal way, not in a power differential way, in a co-regulating way, in a shared experience way. And that is what leads to friendship. And so you can see, like, this took prep, but it wasn't prep for one person. It was prep for the whole class. And I was able to interview the kids later on, and I asked them, I'm like, so what was useful about, like, what did you learn today? What was useful about this lesson? And every kid that I talked to, whether they had disabilities or not, were like, that memory lane was amazing. They're like, it really helped. Then I'm like, well, what was the memory that you evoked? And they shared things from, like a birthday party they went to where they got a present. One kid shared about like some baking experience with his grandma. And every kid I talked to said that was so helpful. And I'm like, that is what we're trying to do. That is what this isn't about adding more. This is about doing different and starting accessibly. And this allowed all the kids to be connected within that community to all of each other, but also everyone started from success. Everybody, even David. Okay. Here's my question for you, because this is a big question. I'm talking about something called making curriculum accessible. This is a very different process from adapting and modifying. And so my question, my prompt for you today for the chat box, just throw it in the chat box, is how is making curriculum accessible different from adapting and modifying for individual learners? Go ahead, throw it in the chat box, and thank you for spending 20 minutes with me.
Thanks, Shelley, for offering us some thoughts about designing for all of our learners, starting from our learners, and also recognizing how when we learn from the diversity of individuals, we can design in ways that benefit everybody. Really powerful. Also, I want to go try all the spices in the kitchen now.
Honestly.
I'm going to pass the torch to my colleagues, Kiran, Belinda, and Bryan, who are all educators together in School District 41, and I'm really excited about the work that they're going to share. So I'll pass to you all now.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Marna. I'm going second instead of third, and happy to be here. Grateful to be coming to you from the unceded traditional territories of the Coquitlam First Nations. And I will be sharing a few ways I've worked alongside fellow educators to help students build discussion skills over time in order to eventually support those rich and engaging conversations, but sometimes challenging, right? That our middle school students want to have, but sometimes need support on how to engage in them. I'd like to thank these educators and their students for collaborating with me on the examples. Leyton recognizes a lot of those names on there. He should be on there as well. I'll be showing you today. We're definitely better together, as was said earlier, and I've learned so much in these conversations and explorations we've done together. In the past couple of years, I was an educator in Coquitlam, and many of us used this book by Sarah K. Ahmed. It's just, I would highly recommend it. It was an inspiration to explore ways to foster and teach social comprehension skills with our students. When I was working in learning services in Coquitlam, we created a diverse text set that explored identity, and we provided it for every minute. And I'll be providing at some point at the end of this a link to a shared folder that'll give you that list. And we also did a learning series that used this book as one of the resources we might use to engage with that text set. But in particular, I really appreciated Sarah's statement, her quote, about the importance of teaching conversation skills, right? That sets students up for success, especially when we move into maybe more difficult or challenging conversations. So with that in mind today, I'll speak to 3 key ideas with examples that hopefully help build confidence in our students, build relationships between them that feel safe, and make really transparent the skills that help us turn towards each other, listen to each other, build understanding, especially when talking about issues or ideas that might be challenging for some. So those 3 key ideas, whoops, I'm struggling here all of a sudden here. There we go. These 3 ideas are scaffold and practice talk, small reps every day, build skills and norm criteria together with your students, and a marked discussion structure. I'll share an example of that helps us practice those skills in a more formalized way. So scaffolding talk, those small daily reps, is really an analogy for what we know works when strengthening muscles, right? In this case, small daily reps of intentional talk that are built into everyday sequences in the classroom. And beyond that, building of the confidence muscle that we know is really important for our middle students. It's also, to share our ideas And the message becomes clear when we're doing it daily and in small, quick ways, that every student's voice, all their ideas, their thinking matters. And that's really important. So many of you have those opening rituals and closing rounds in your classroom, right? They're so important because they not only become a routine that builds in safety and familiarity for students every day, but they become great opportunities, I think, to build in quick talk. And quick talk that doesn't feel overwhelming or scary, but is intentional. And so in this example, this class is exploring identity, and we've established the routine of a quick write in the morning and then a quick share. This one was brainstorming a list of I am the one who. I shared my list before the students started. Then they had 3 minutes to write down as many things as they could to finish the sentence. I am the one who. And at the end, their teacher had done the quick write with them, and she shared her list, which was very powerful. And then we did a quick whip around the room, inviting students to share one thing. Again, just a really quick way that when it becomes a routine is something that students know is coming, and is a wonderful quick way to talk and share. And of course, closing rounds do the same thing, right? They allow us to, especially if we're speaking them out loud, practice that quick talk and make sense of what we're learning. So even in this tech world, what my colleagues and I have discovered is that middle school students really love stickies. So whatever the case, using stickies for each student to capture their voice, responses, or thinking, it really allows each student to process, to take some time to process, get something down, and then put it up with everyone else's thinking so we can see that represented. So in this case, we were working with a number of picture books with the themes of individual differences, first impressions, belonging. So we asked them some key prompts, some key questions before reading a picture book that explored these ideas. And you know, the sticky note is small enough that it doesn't feel overwhelming to get an idea down, right? Because students write a word, a phrase, you can see there they've sketched, created little diagrams, and then we put them up so that they can see every voice is represented. And this can also be a support for a turn and talk, inviting them to share with each other, really a jumping off point for quick talk in the classroom. Having loose parts in your classroom, probably something that you do, but you know, to have them as a routine to pull out to represent thinking in a different way is just great to create third points for conversation, right? To activate thinking and process and synthesize and move away from some of those traditional writing activities we do. So my colleague, Christy Livingston, and Leyton's colleague as well, has loose parts in her classroom. And she uses them for all sorts of things. Often she'll ask students to take a picture of whatever they're asked to represent, and then she has them annotate their thinking digitally on the image to help others understand what their thinking was. And you know, this can be done individually. This can be done in partners, used as an opening or closing activity with a prompt or a question, again, encouraging that talk amongst each other. Chalk Talk, many of you are really familiar with this visible routine. It's a silent conversation that asks learners to consider some kind of a prompt. Idea, question, might be a three-dimensional thing in the middle, around a topic or issue that you're exploring. And you know, they're silently responding in some way, right? They have a pen in hand and they're using sketches or symbols or writing. Students can check mark or use a question mark, draw pictures, but they're doing it silently. And while that sounds for middle school students, could it be done? Yes, it can be done. And of course, practice, I'm always surprised at how many students just glom onto this and love it. And they move around with 5 or 6 prompts so that by the end, when they come back to their original page, they see a lot of ideas, and there's an opportunity for them to pull out a few key ideas, have a conversation, share it out with the class. And finally, you know, another idea is inside outside circle, right? And one that you'll be familiar with. You can see the little diagram at the top there. You know, you have an equal amount of students on the inside facing out to an outside partner. You're moving one circle one way and one circle another. And it really, practice is key with this one, and starting with those low risk, quick questions to build community, have some fun with, right? We often time the interactions and make that really visible. So students felt okay about sharing at least one thing at the beginning because they knew it was a brief share, right? They knew it was going to move along. This allows everyone to connect. This class in particular, that's what we were working on. Everyone to connect with everyone at some point in the class, get to know each other just a little, with anything from a question to a fun prompt. And then building criteria together. It really is about investing time into making transparent the skills and norms that help lead us to have those rich conversations, and making clear the purpose of those conversations and what they look like, what they sound like, what they feel like. So co-creating criteria was a focus for many of the classrooms I have and continue to work with. And in particular, we focused in on the curricular competency of exchange ideas and viewpoints to build shared understanding and extend thinking, which of course finds its way in the ELA curriculum from kindergarten to grade 12, but certainly you can find the threads of it in all discipline areas. And we spent time making this visible together. So in this particular classroom, we started with the why, used sticky note thinking in this case to ask these 3 questions: what's helpful, what's challenging, what's important. And honestly, this allowed us to mine the wisdom in the room. Students have a lot of experience by middle school with both helpful and unhelpful class discussions, and they're more than willing to talk about that. So we wanted to think about and talk about why discussion might be important and what would help it make it more effective. Certainly you could see opportunity here for drama, for all sorts of simulations as well. In this classroom, we wanted to build some understanding of what an engaged, brave, and respectful discussion looks like, sounds like, and feels like. So you can see at the top there, we used Chalk Talk as a beginning point, and then captured some of those main ideas on the anchor charts that then became important reminders. They were anchor charts in the room on a constant basis of what we were looking for, what we had said as a group was important for us when we were having those informal and formal conversations. In a number of classes, I used a sketch and brainstorm template to unpack the exchange ideas competency in particular, almost like exploding the sentence strategy where you're taking it apart. We created a couple of looks like and sounds like examples together as a class and talked about how we might use a sketch or a symbol to capture our thinking. And then students drew their ideas and noted any ideas of what that looks like, sounds like. Again, if you had loose parts or you were using those as a thinking tool, you could use those here as well, right? To represent those important components of this competency. There's some sketches that I just absolutely love, and of course showed back to the students as well. We really analyzed this one. We saw such power in the sketches and symbols they came up with. And you can see it really gives insight into their thinking, their perceptions, sometimes their misperceptions, but ultimately their brilliance, right? It helped them make sense of and visualize the most important aspects of this discussion competency, especially the part around building shared understanding and extending thinking, really analyzing. That's the point of a discussion ultimately, especially when we're moving into things that we have different perspectives or opinions about. That's the point, is we want to get there so that we're really extending each other's thinking. And here was an opportunity too to begin to talk about the language of disagreement and how it played an important role in helping each other grow and learn. And I just love this because you can see here, right, that build shared understanding, the picture that this student drew, right? You can visibly see it. So it's so important for us to show these back and have students feel familiar with this. So after using the sketch and brainstorm template, we were able to practice with inside-outside circles. In this classroom, we are exploring themes of identity and belonging, and we used a mini text set of excerpts from a number of the middle school novels that were in our text set. You can see those at the bottom. So students responded to those excerpts in a variety of ways. And then we really kept it simple, and again, this is informal. We're just getting practice. explain one thing, listen to your partner's response. Remember, we're timing this. Talk about what you think connects all of these excerpts, what is similar, what big ideas do you see. For this class, honestly, it was a way to practice getting comfortable talking to each other. There were little groups and they hadn't really had the time to really get to know everybody and get comfortable with that. Talk about text and practice those discussion skills that we were developing. We reminded the students what they said it looked like and sound like, had those anchor charts up, and some of the language that we were listening for as they moved through that inside-outside circle. Eventually, and in many of the classes that were developing this competency, I took the students' thinking and summarized it on a single point rubric. And the thing about this is, the wonderful thing about the process of co-creating together is that by the time we brought this back to them, it wasn't just a list on a page. It was very familiar to them. It wasn't just words, but skills that they understood and recognized. And so now we can use this for students to goal set before a conversation, to reflect with after a conversation, to use as pull out learning goals for a particular learning sequence, or use to provide feedback. So finally, the MARC discussion is a structured conversation that allows students to practice these skills, but really build confidence in sharing and putting that criteria into action. Just a little background, we were asked by teachers to help facilitate this structure for a few reasons, and you might recognize some of these reasons, right? One was that only a few students were speaking up or offering their ideas. So in what way can we facilitate opportunity for everyone to talk? Many of these classrooms had students who were new to Canada or found speaking out difficult for a variety of reasons. They wanted to share, but they needed some structure and some support to help them. Also, students were struggling at times to have conversations that help them grow and understand each other's perspectives. So in some cases, the conversations were getting aggressive or hurtful or supporting only one opinion, especially when some of those challenging issues were coming up. So while teachers were engaging in our diverse text set, which had many titles exploring, a diverse identity and experiences, our colleagues were really keen to help all students feel safe and wanted a structure to help them engage in meaningful conversations. So before a MARC discussion, and again, an overview of all of this will be in your shared folder. So I will move through it fairly quickly, but it's all there to go back to if you're interested or if you haven't done it before. But ahead of a MARC discussion is really important. We want to prepare. The whole point is that we want success. We want all those students to feel like they're having success. It's a strengths-based experience, right? So we give the students MARC discussion questions. It might be a combination of ones you've created, students have created. They're open-ended. While they're connected to, these are just some examples, while they may be connected to a book or a text or something that you're learning. In this case, these were two different classes, two different read alouds. The questions were connected to these books, but more so they were connected to big ideas and themes that these students could relate to. And then giving students plenty of support and time and conversation to get a sense of the questions, craft some answers or notes. This is a supporting document to bring to the discussion. This isn't what we're looking at. This is just to give them confidence, right? So for students who needed further support, they could choose a couple of questions to answer. For students new to the language, they translated and then had a few words or sentences that they practiced. And in a class I was with yesterday, the teacher had practiced with them. And so they felt very confident coming in to into the MARC discussion. So when we come to the MARC discussion, students bring their prepared questions and their criteria page. And again, some will have lots of answers, lots of things written on. Some don't have anything, but they have the questions in front of them and they have the criteria. And we use that criteria, again, to choose 1 to 2 personal goals. Every student chooses, they decide, what's my intention today? Maybe it's just active listening and facing everyone. Maybe I'm going to use some of that language of thinking. And it just blows me away every time when you give kids opportunity and practice what they end up doing. They end up doing way more than what their intentions were. In our first MARC discussions, we often just stay with that exchange ideas and viewpoints. So offer an idea, maybe a viewpoint. But I am always pleasantly surprised at how, because we've done that co-creation, how many students actually move the conversation forward. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Of course, we have the language and norms reminders up during that marked discussion where students can actually see the language that we're listening for, right? You know, it feels perhaps a little performative at first, but again, because we've practiced, students quickly move into being very comfortable using the language. So the teacher's actually not in the circle. They're standing on the outside of the circle. They're using this type of tally sheet with the, you know, the competencies broken down a little bit, what we're looking for. And they can be sitting or standing, and they're really tallying for contribution. You can see my notes there is I'm also noticing the types of things that students are saying in a strengths-based way so that I can share back with them what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing. The first student contributor offers the first question, and then each student contributor chooses the next person to speak. They use their hands. If a student hasn't contributed, they hold up a fist. If they've contributed once, they hold up one finger and two and three and so on. And we let the students know that's how the structure will work. And again, just encourage them. If you see someone with a fist up, that's who you're going to choose, right? Instead of someone who's got 5 fingers up. And again, it's just amazing how well they do that and the equity and how they show such equity with that. Many move beyond their answers on their page fairly quickly as well, which is lovely. As the discussion progresses, you as the teacher can stop once in a while, not a lot, but once in a while, just to make observations and notice what you're seeing in a strengths-based way. And then, of course, when you want to move on to the next question. These are 2 classes I've worked with, and the top one I just was with yesterday, and I'm constantly amazed at the growth that occurs in this process when you prepare in advance, when you've practiced in small ways, when you've given students time in the actual discussion to build momentum and confidence. I've been so fortunate to witness some powerful discussions, honestly. And watching students find the courage to say something, to offer their ideas, even to disagree with each other and share their own personal stories really is just absolutely lovely. One class we worked with, my colleague Jen and I, we worked with a class who, it was an amazing discussion, and we found that they've done a lot of community circles. And so obviously when you've done that kind of work leading up to a discussion like this, you're going to be able to listen to each other. You're going to empathize with each other, and you're going to be willing to share. Just yesterday, I was with a grade 8 class that had their first marked discussion, and they had done a lot of scaffolding ahead of time. But still, many of the students just needed that time. And we ended up having a nutrition break and then coming back. And that little break and some little conversations here and there just made all the difference. And all of a sudden, more students were sharing. They used the language just seamlessly. And actually, it was just beautiful. You know, they started off with this question about safety. What makes you feel safe? Then students started talking about, you know, by themselves or with other people. Then they moved into introverts and extroverts. And then one student said, do you think the events in our lives can impact us so that we become more introverted? Boom, the discussion just took off. And of course, now their discussion sheets are just, you know, they're talking. They're not using those questions anymore. Finally, it's an opportunity to reflect and goal set, pay attention as students to what we did well, what we're celebrating, and what we want to do the next time we come together. And you can see here just some lovely reflections. This came from yesterday, actually, that students are thinking about. So for you, and you do not have to think about all 3 of these questions, just one of them, what do you do to support students in engaging in conversations? What structures are helpful in developing, especially that confidence over time? And how do you make these skills and norms visible in your classroom?
Thank you, Marna. We're going to pop our responses in the chat box. Marna's going to leave them up for about a minute here, just so we can pick one to reply to. Marna, thank you for that rich set of examples. It reminds me of some of the things I used to do with literature circles. So it really makes me think about how could I do this with a shared text with the whole class before we move into lit circles, so that, you know, we have some kind of shared content to work with before kind of asking kids to have tougher conversations in small groups without that scaffolding.
Thank you for saying that, Leyton. I think that was really, this was the stepping stone to a lot of teachers wanting to do those small groups, but worried that they weren't ready to do those. So this was sort of that bridge, right? So thank you for saying that.
Marna, you mentioned that folks might have access to these resources.
Yes. Let me think. Oops. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing if that's okay, and then I can grab my link and put it in the chat.
So thanks to Marna for generously sharing, everyone, and also compiling the materials and putting them in the chat box for us so that we can draw upon them.
Going to be sharing today is called Affirming Identities. And before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. But we also want to acknowledge that in our discussion today, we're going to be talking about identities and taking a little bit of time to share our own journeys and our experiences with connecting to aspects of our identity. And this conversation could bring up some emotions for some people, or it could be a little bit triggering. So please, if you need to take a moment to yourself, or if you'd like to connect, feel free to send a direct message to one of the facilitators or us to connect with as we go through this talk. The first slide is a little bit of background about myself. My particular focus areas in the district are supporting English language learners or multilingual students. And a little bit about my own personal history. I'm second generation. I was born in Canada, in Burnaby, and my home language is Punjabi. So I was fluent in Punjabi when I started preschool at the age of 3. And when I started preschool, I immediately learned English. I always wanted to be the first one at preschool class, helping the teachers set up for the day. I wanted to stay late to help them pack up. I was a real keener. And so I picked up English very quickly. And in doing so, I switched the language of my family home to English. So even though I lived in a multi-generational home, my parents and my grandparents were fluent in English. And so it was quite easy to make that switch. There was a home video of me a few months after starting preschool where my mom asked me to speak in Punjabi for the video, and I ended up speaking English with an Indian accent. So that's how fast the switch happened for me. And I think that my experience is very common for a lot of students, whether they're born in Canada or they're new immigrants to the country, that they might know one or multiple languages before starting kindergarten, but when they're immersed in our English school system, quite often their home language can sort of stall at the age at which they start school at. So now as an adult, I can understand Punjabi, but my speaking of it is not the greatest. And I know that when I'm talking, I'm muddling up my words and all of that. And with that sort of loss of language that I experienced, I also feel like that impacted growing up my connection to my culture. And so now as an adult with my own children, I'm sort of struggling with that a little bit about how am I able to impart the culture of my grandparents and my great-grandparents and where we come from in India, because I don't necessarily have those language skills to pass on to my children with the culture as well. And so the work that I'm trying to do here and with the team is thinking about how are we able to honor and celebrate where our students come from and all the languages that they speak and all the gifts that they bring into the classroom. And so that's a little bit about myself, and now I'll turn it over to Belinda.
Hi, folks. Hopefully us moving the screen is going to be okay. Hi, I'm Belinda Chi. So I work in the Burnaby School District. I am a learning lead with Kiran and Bryan on the staff development team. A little bit about me, I guess, this project is really close to my heart because of the idea of representation and how I've been affected by representation. I remember the first time I saw myself in a book was when I think I was in my 3rd year of teaching, and a colleague had read this book, The Name Jar, to both her class and my class. And I was tearing up at the back because it was just the first time that I've ever seen myself kind of represented, or someone close to my culture represented in a book. And just thinking about like how that didn't happen for me until I was like in my mid-20s. Is mind blowing. So like, why are we not bringing in books to affirm kids' identities and also, show them different kinds of different walks of life and culture so that they can learn. And then the other thing for me was when I was in high school, growing up, the first time it was in high school when I had a teacher of the same culture, Chinese Canadian individual who was a secondary teacher. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know people from my culture could be teachers in Canada. Like, what is happening? Didn't know that was a thing, so it was really cool to see. He actually never taught me, but he was someone that I kind of like admired from afar. And then here I am. I'm now a teacher. I just feel like it's so important when we are able to see ourselves in different roles. I think it's so powerful. And then inclusion is close to my heart. I just feel it's so important for everyone to feel included, to feel like they belong, especially in schools, but in our community. And yeah, so these are the things that touch my heart and are so meaningful to me. I'm going to pass this on to Bryan.
Greetings, everyone. I just want to acknowledge and thank Marna for stepping up and filling our little technological void there. And I'm hoping that everyone who's viewing this can recognize that everything that Shelley has spoken about, everything that Marna has spoken about, I think is really easy to apply in what we have a nice complementary set of presentations. So I'm Bryan Gidinski. My pronouns are he, him. You'll see that I've just selected a few images from social media about sort of topical things that have been happening in the realm of conversations around sexual orientation and gender identity. And I was kind of fortunate in that I grew up and I had lots of people who looked like me in books. And yet there was a piece of me in terms of who I am as a person and in terms of my identity that I rarely saw in books. And then when I finally did have the opportunity to start seeing that queerness presented in books, it wasn't always represented in particularly positive ways. And so it wasn't until I was an adult and that I started reading some of the young adult fiction that was available that I really started to see characters that sort of carried all the dimensions of who I was. And particularly in a time where there's lots of challenges about who gets to be represented in books and what books are sort of suitable for young people, we just really want to engage people in some critical conversations about books because kids are ready for these. And when these conversations can be held in supported ways, it's pretty amazing what comes out of those conversations in terms of understanding the landscape of diversity that we all exist in.
So our project that we're working on this year, Affirming Identities, is essentially a series of lunch and learns. So we've been invited into a few different school sites where we come in with our big box of books and we try to spark a conversation with staff around how we can include diverse text in our teaching practice. So we leave the set of books with the schools and we ask them to take some time to use them in their teaching practice and then to reach out to us for ongoing support. The learning intentions for our project is to encourage teachers to think about the strategic text selection and how they can be really thoughtful in choosing books that are powerful and provocative to help students gain deeper understandings of the people in the community around them. We want to select texts that are that highlight diversity and intersectional identities of different people. And when we chose our books and we were thinking about the learners in our schools, we wanted to find things that would not only affirm the identities of the learners that we work with, but also to help inform the identities of others in our community. So it might be not necessarily someone that's in that class, but by choosing books where students can have windows in to see how others experience the world. And so really the whole point of this project is to spark conversations amongst staff through their own professional learning and professional development, but also think about how we can support teachers to bring in diverse texts in meaningful ways with their students.
And we're not going to take the time to share this video here today, but many of you are probably familiar with Rudine Sims Bishop, and she's been incredibly influential in terms of diverse representation in books. And she talks about the analogy of mirrors, and books being mirrors where students can see themselves, people who are like them, people who are positive, powerful, that look like them. And so they see themselves in the books. There's also the analogy of windows, and Kiran was referencing that in terms of students being able to get insights into other people's experiences. And then this idea of sliding glass doors, where we get these opportunities to interact with identities that might be unfamiliar, that might be foreign to us, and to kind of consider how our worldview, how our connections align with those identities. And kind of get an opportunity to step in and just sort of be there for sort of an experience. And so what we've done is we've sort of curated, and this isn't obviously an exhaustive list. We've perused them in terms of, there's some representation of neurodiversity, there is some representation of LGBTQ+ identities, there's representation of BIPOC, racialized representations of indigeneity. And so, like I say, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's a place to start. And they're books that have substance, so that they're worthy of deep conversation and repeated conversation. And so we've just provided that list for you in terms of if you're looking for titles that you might want to explore in your context.
Okay, so as important as it is for us as educators to bring in, books that are accessible for our students, that represent our students, and that helps them learn about different kinds of people in the world, it's always, I feel, so important for us to do the learning ourselves. I think that's where the most meaningful work comes from. So we also, in our book kit that we're bringing to schools, we have this selection of titles from various authors for teachers to explore. So we're encouraging teachers to either, read it on their own, maybe have a little book club, even try to do like lit circles. If some people haven't done lit circles, perhaps try to do lit circles as an adult group, as a staff, and then that's something that they can also bring into their classrooms. So from the work of Leyton, Schnellert, and Donna Kozak, we borrowed from these lovely folks who we're just going to go through what critical literacy is and what critical literacy is not. So critical literacy is a lens, it's a mindset, both for teaching and learning, both, for ourselves, but also for our students. And I also think, if you're the only person on staff who's doing this work, how amazing is it that you can share these with other staff members and do that kind of working alongside one another, right? Critical literacy is concerned with promoting justice and equality and resisting dominant power and ideologies and transforming oppressive power relations. I really think about, the way that we are in the world, and when we are moving in the world, there's so many things around us that there are so many dominant narratives that are around us that we aren't even aware of, like how buildings are designed and how some streets don't have sidewalks. Like, how is that accessible, right? Like, who are these people making these decisions? But we want our kids to think about those things, right? Because they're going to change our future and hopefully design much better buildings, much more accessible places for folks. So critical literacy works from the view that education is inherently political. It's a responsive and flexible framework, and it does look and sound differently in various contexts, I think, depending on where you are. my life in Burnaby here is pretty comfortable, but sometimes when I'm traveling somewhere else, I'm like the only racialized person and I'm treated very differently. And, that's something that, we need to teach like young people to be aware of, depending on the context they're in, right? And sometimes that relates to safety, like how comfortable am I sharing who I really am when I'm in an unfamiliar place? There's so many of those pieces we need to think about. So what critical literacy is not is something that educators would like just simply add on to their instruction. It's really a way of being in the world. Like, how are we in relation to the world? It's not a checklist. It's not like a set of practices or one size fits all. It's not a scripted program or like a unit of study that you're just going to do. I feel like this is work that we should be doing in all of our subjects. When we do math examples, think about the language we use when we reference our questions and our word problems. Like, those are the things we need to think about. Language is so important. And really, it's something that children should not be sheltered from, right? Like, we need to be introducing them and giving them opportunities to interact with text. And as we know, there are book bans that are happening in not just that other country down south, but even in our own country. So we need to be aware that we have the freedom to bring these texts into our classrooms and take advantage of that and share that with our kiddos. And just some connections to the curricular competencies. We just pulled from English language arts from the middle years, grade 6. We wanted to make it clear that this is not an add-on. Critical literacy and bringing in texts like these that we've chosen are really a part of the curriculum. And here are the things you can assess. It's not something extra. It can be something you're doing. And then we also brought in some social studies examples as well for curricular competencies that you can bring in. Bryan, did you want to add to this piece a little bit?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that a lot of picture books are offering now, which I think is really valuable to sort of bridge that link between literacy and social studies, is that there's a lot of texts that feature stories that are based on actual people and actual events. And what's kind of cool about it is that some of those texts are providing not only the narrative, but they're actually providing informational texts like timelines and artifacts and letters. And so it's kind of an opportunity to cross curricular in terms of all of the humanities.
The next thing that we do when we're presenting to schools is we offer this choice board to see what staff would be potentially interested in learning more about. So these are four suggestions that we offer for ways that teachers can start using these books in their classes. So we'll go through each of the four right now very quickly as an overview for you all.
Hello again. Okay, so with this piece, we just have some guiding questions that you could work through with your students or your staff if you decide to choose to do books as a staff or do a little book club. But yeah, we just found that these kinds of questions are really open and they allow students and staff to really engage in what they've read and have really powerful conversations. So here are just some guiding questions you could do as a group or individually. There's so many different ways you could do it.
The next option is a text pass, and this is where a teacher could set out a selection of different texts for students. And we want to make sure that there are more texts than there are students. And the idea is that students would take some time to walk around the space and browse the different books. And then the teacher would ask the students to select a text. So each student would be making a choice. And then they would be given a short period of time to explore that text and maybe consider something that they could share out, something that they noticed with the text. And when we consider access points for all of our students, We could have students create little emoji stickers to put on the text. We could provide sentence frames and word banks for students to help them create a sentence to express themselves, what they want to say about an individual book. And then we would ask the students to share in a circle format. And then we would pass the books around as well. So students are engaging with all the different texts and taking some time to reflect, connect with the books, hear from others, to sort of deepen their understandings and see what connections they can make, but also hear about the connections that their peers might be making with different books.
The other nice thing about doing that text pass and having the books circulate is that it often will motivate students to read books that they didn't necessarily choose initially. And they just get a lot of exposure to a lot of titles. And then the other, another option is just looking at some of the social media posts or memes and just sort of looking at them and having conversation about how they connect to themes and topics in the books. And I could find it quite amusing. When I saw this last post from Nikita Redcar, that she, as sort of an act of resistance, was going to start just commenting "love is love," and that's so inspiring on straight people's engagement posts. And so just that idea of sort of flipping the narrative in terms of how we view people is a powerful opportunity for conversation and exploration.
Okay, and then the other one on our choice board is literature circles. This is from Faye Brownlee's Grand Conversations, which you might be very familiar with, but it's a great way for students to engage in these texts. I think you can also do this with picture books, not just novels, because, you know, it's not just like reading it once and then you're done. There's so many different themes you can explore, even with picture books in a small group. And I think also, as Bryan mentioned earlier, some of those characters are based on, you know, people who are real. So you could also bring in articles from social media, or bring in other videos or songs that might relate to the themes that you're discussing, which would make really rich conversation.
Just one sort of comment before we get to our reflection questions is one of the things that's been really incredibly powerful for me as an educator working in collaboration with Belinda and Kiran is that I occupy, you know, a certain space and have certain experiences, certain expectations of the world. And it's been really fascinating when we had a conversation about the first time each of us saw, you know, our own identity reflected in books, in movies, how quickly that expanded my own worldview, just listening to the experiences of my colleagues and friends. And so we encourage you not just to, you know, think of this as an opportunity for you in one classroom, but to consider how you might share and collaborate with others.
So before we lead, thank you for your patience. Before we lead into the reflection, I wanted to just share one anecdote to hopefully inspire some hope. And really the true purpose of a project like this is we're really trying to encourage and support our students in building empathy for themselves and for others, and really connecting with people from all different walks of life that they're seeing in the community around them. And so a personal connection is my mom this year has gone, she's had a series of health challenges. She had a brain aneurysm, a cardiac arrest, and a stroke, and it was very scary for a period of time, but she's still here. She continues to make improvements and growth. But one of the big changes is that she is now in a wheelchair and is sort of relearning how to walk. And so for my very young children, they have a very close bond with my mom, and she would often provide babysitting and daycare and things like that for me. And so it's been a shift for them in seeing how Nani was before and how Nani is now. And so as we're now sort of gearing up into Christmas and thinking about what they want from Santa Claus, what they sort of come up with is the older one has asked for a Barbie with a broken leg, and by that she means prosthetic leg. She just doesn't have the language to express that yet. And then she has determined for her younger sister, that younger sister is going to be asking for a Barbie in a wheelchair, and they're both very excited to receive that. And it's so powerful to see how their worldviews have been impacted by the experience that our family has all been on, and watching my mom's journey. And so we hope through this project that our students are building connections and building empathy for others, and also showing that kindness towards themselves as well. So as we leave you today, we'd like you to consider choosing one of these series of reflection prompts that we have up. So think of a time where you felt like some aspect of your identity was affirmed in a significant way. And think about sort of what that meant for you and how that experience was for you, and share that in the chat box. You might also instead consider thinking of a time where you've observed a representation of a particular identity that's not typically centered publicly and is not an identity that you hold. And think about what impressions did you have about that representation, and how did perhaps interactions with someone who carries that identity shift your thinking about that. The last category is thinking about, generally speaking, have representations evolved or changed since your first experience with representation? If yes, consider why, and if no, consider maybe why not. So please take some moments to reflect and share some thoughts in the chat box. And again, thank you so much for your time, and apologies for our tech issues. Thank you.
It was worth the drama. If there's something I can say has been an unexpected challenge over the last 2.5 years, it has been how educators, teachers are committed to this work and yet experiencing quite a bit of pushback in a variety of ways. And so it's so nice to be scaffolded and supported in this work. So thank you, Bryan, Belinda, and Kiran so much. As you're just responding in the chat box, everyone, give you a little time. I'll just mention for the people who listening to the recording later that today's session was recorded and that it will be sent out by email in about 10 days or so. I'll make sure to check that the right name of the right session is mentioned in the email. I think probably 3 or 4 people came expecting our Math and Indigenous Education series today, which will continue, just it wasn't today. But you'll get an email with the link to today's session, and you're welcome to share it. And for folks who weren't able to attend, many folks, if you've just signed up for the series, you automatically get sent the recording. So Bryan and Kiran and Belinda and Marna and Shelley, thank you for offering us important ideas that help us think about not just diversity in multi-age classrooms, that level of diversity, but welcoming the diversity of all children in our context in a way that we can design with from the beginning with that in mind. I'll pass to Tammy as I put up the last slide.
We're just so grateful. So many things to consider. And I think people are starting to respond in the chat, but I think the questions are so reflective for me. It's like really considering where does that land for me? So I think people are still will be reflecting for a while, and just so grateful for all of you. Thanks, Marna, for jumping into the gap, and just really appreciate this team. We met last night, and just grateful for the voices and your experience and your willingness and generosity around sharing materials with folks too. So we will include those links as well when the recording goes out. So thank you so much for sharing a piece of you and your work to this audience. Aichka.
Our next session is Tuesday, January 30th. We'll be sure that the reminder email comes out prior to, so you all have the link. We're delighted that Angela Stott, Jennifer Eddy, and Rebecca Labenville will be offering us some examples of cross-curricular and multi-age literacy integrated teaching approaches. And then our final session is Tuesday, April 23rd, where Nikki Lynham and Kendra Jacobs will look at us for multi-age mathematics practice that is both culturally sustaining and inclusive. So it's really exciting work. We're so grateful that those of you who found us today found us. And I can't think of a better way for me to spend 90 minutes hanging out with some just magnificent folks who are saying, how can we deepen our practice? And I'm just constantly reminded of many things I did earlier in my practice. I need to come back to them, because just because I did them 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 33 years ago doesn't mean the kids don't still need them. And so thank you to my colleagues for deepening my practice, but also renewing my practice today. Thanks everybody, and love you in a professional way.